All right, so we will be starting with Donani, and then we'll go to Malia, and then Selena will present on behalf of Victor, and then we'll play Mia and James' videos. And then for the questions, we will change up the sequence. All right.
And I think one more person is in the waiting room. I saw something flash.
Okay. All right, Donani, whenever you're ready, you have 5 minutes.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be here. My name is Janani Ramachandran, and I'm a proud resident of Oakland, running for California State Assembly District 18. 1 in 3 Californians live at or near the poverty line. Shameful for the wealthiest state in the nation. 160,000 Californians are houseless on a given night, and 2 million cannot afford to pay rent next month. Shameful for a state led by a party that claims housing is a human right. Every 3 hours, a Californian dies from a gunshot. Shameful for a state that prides itself on supposedly tough gun laws. We're having national conversations about a Green New Deal and about Medicare for all, neither of which have happened in our very own haven of democratic values. I am done waiting for change to just happen. I am ready to fight and enact bold policies that will push the needle now and bring the change that our communities deserve. So I am running on a platform that is building a movement to fight for 5 key things. First, a $22 living wage, because it is tragic that half of Californians living in poverty work a full-time job. A living wage will both lift Californian families out of poverty and strengthen our economy. 2, I am fighting for more affordable housing and stronger statewide tenant protections, like reforming the Ellis Act, which I've worked alongside other local tenant groups over the past year to try to do. 3, I am fighting to reimagine our justice system. I want to bring an end to qualified immunity for police officers who commit harm. I want to invest in non-carceral community violence interventions, like the handful of Oakland-based programs I've worked for over the years. 4, I am fighting for Medicare for all, because as a former community health worker, I know the life-saving value of preventative care and coverage. Finally, I am fighting for a Green New Deal so that my generations and the ones that come after can keep our shorelines, so that low-income communities of color can finally breathe clean air. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm born and raised in the East Bay. I attended Stanford University, and then I worked at a community health clinic for years, providing in-home case management service to immigrant mothers, most of whom were survivors of domestic violence and either housing insecure or homeless. Watching families be ripped apart by our inequitable systems of justice, watching our most vulnerable community members often be hurt by the very laws intended to protect them. These experiences inspired me to go to Berkeley Law to think more deeply about how we can change these systems. I've defended tenants facing eviction from some of Oakland's most notoriously corrupt landlords. I've represented survivors of violence fighting tooth and nail in court just to get a shot at safety for themselves and for their children. I've worked with individuals experiencing mental health crisis and failed by just too many systems. So I'm running now because the voices of these communities have been silenced for too long. These voices, our voices, are being drowned out by moderates who are too scared to push for the changes we need. Drowned out by politicians influenced by the power of big corporate money. I began to push for change when I served as an Oakland Public Ethics Commissioner. I continued to push for change when I served as a California State Commissioner for Asian Pacific Islander American Affairs. But I'm hungry to push for far greater change at a time when we need it the most. So join me and let us make history together. If elected, I would be California's first South Asian Assemblywoman and first LGBTQ Asian Pacific Islander Assemblywoman. I'm running a corporate-free campaign, rejecting money from corporations, police unions, big pharma, oil and gas corporations and their executives, and of course, all real estate developers. So I vow to bring every ounce of my energy, my community-driven perspectives, and my fighter spirit to our state government. But this is not a task I can do alone. This is a movement we can build together. So I am asking for your support in this quest for justice. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you. And next, we will hear from Malia. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Alfred. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for having me here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Malia Vella. I'm the Vice Mayor of the City of Alameda. I'm an attorney for the Teamsters Union, where I represent working people, both public and private sector. I'm a mom of 2 young children under the age of 2, and I'm also a professor at Mills College, where I teach ethics and public policy to a number of students in the undergraduate and graduate school programs. I've learned a lot being in public office, and I think that there's so many issues that we are working on collectively, both in the region, at our individual cities, and with the state of California and federal government. What we've seen is that too often, young, diverse, experienced voices are often left out of the highest levels of decision making. I've experienced this on city council when there were issues like access to lactation spaces, even at places like City Hall, where we're having debates about whether or not we should offer free menstrual products in our restrooms. These are the types of conversations that are often overlooked, but have day-to-day impacts that are very lasting on our community members. Served on the Alameda City Council for more than 4 years, 2 of those as vice mayor. And on the council, I have been forward-thinking, focusing on health and safety of our residents, providing economic opportunity for our businesses, and ensuring equity in our policies. When the pandemic hit, I assembled a team of volunteers to reach out personally to every senior in our city to connect them with resources, to reach out to our vulnerable community members to make sure that they had necessities like food, access to medicine, and masks. I supported financial assistance and enacted policies to help our businesses hit hard by the economic fallout by COVID-19. I did this while still pushing to make sure that our minimum wage increases that I had fought for and voted on continued to be enacted so that our workers, our frontline workers, continued to receive increases that were so desperately needed. I also took the lead in enacting eviction moratorium to protect our residents at financial risk through no fault of their own. We extended this moratorium to our businesses to prevent commercial landlords from wreaking havoc on our downtown. I also pushed to make sure that we allowed for and provided direct financial assistance to those tenants in need. Through our Alameda Strong campaign, we have made sure that Alamedans have received economic and financial assistance where needed. I'm going to take this experience to Sacramento as we plan for our future recovery and ensure that no one is left behind. As we emerge from the shelter-in-place restrictions and rebuild to keep Californians safe and healthy. As we recover from COVID-19, I'm going to continue to fight to make sure that we have equity in terms of access to vaccinations, making sure that the hardest hit communities get more vaccinations first and that all of our schools continue to stay open. Beyond COVID-19, there are a number of other challenges that require experienced leadership, and I will make decisions based on fairness and equity. Those are the principles and values that have guided me. I'm a leader in Alameda around housing equity, fighting for tenant protections against unfair rent hikes and evictions. In fact, when I joined the council, I was the one that pushed and was the change vote to allow for just cause protections for our tenants and a hard rent cap. I continue to work with our tenant groups throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and on a number of different issues to make sure that Alamedans are able to stay and not get displaced. We're also been fighting on these issues at the state level, and I've been proud to endorse the measures that would have enacted the same kind of rent control statewide. We've also done a lot in Alameda and in the county about addressing homelessness, but more needs to be done. And when racial justice protests have continued to erupt throughout the county, I advocated for a community-led process to examine personal biases in police policy, tactics to root out inherent racism, but we need to do more than just de-escalation training. It's why I voted and led the way on demilitarizing our police, and also taking a community-led approach to reimagining policing. I'm a product of the 18th Assembly District. I was born and raised in Alameda and San Leandro. I went to high school in Oakland. I care deeply about Alameda, Oakland, and San Leandro. This is home for me. I made a point to decide to move home here after law school to raise my family, and I hope you'll join me in my campaign for Assembly. Together, we can make sure that the things that matter most to us are acted upon in Sacramento. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next we will have someone from Victor's campaign to introduce Victor, or to talk about Victor, who couldn't make it in person today. So whenever you're ready, you have 5 minutes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Selena Reynes. As Alfred was saying, I'm here speaking on behalf of Victor Aguilar. Vice Mayor Aguilar couldn't make it today because he's in a regular scheduled city council meeting, but I'm going to do my best to represent his campaign, his values, and to answer any questions that you all have. I might not take as much as 5 minutes since I'm his proxy, but I'm going to outline a little bit of what he stands for. And before I do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I know him and why I felt comfortable speaking on his behalf today. I'm an English teacher at Bishop O'Dowd in Oakland. I grew up in the East Bay. I currently live in San Leandro, and I'm a community organizer in San Leandro, and it was under those circumstances that I met Victor. It was actually under rather tragic circumstances because last year, as many of you might know, a homeless Black man named Stephen Taylor was shot by our police. And many of our city council members stayed silent on that issue, but Victor was out supporting the community and supporting the demands of Stephen Taylor's family at every step of the way, both publicly and behind the scenes. And he was at protests. He championed police oversight, which council has promised to deliver by this summer. And he's committed to making systemic change. So that is the context in which I know him. He was our first openly gay vice mayor and a former school board member. He's also a member of the Latinx community. He supports groups that have been historically marginalized by the political process. And that's a beautiful thing. While he is at city council, he championed policies that supported our community, such as hazard pay for grocery workers, a rent stabilization ordinance, and eviction moratorium. He protected mobile homes from upzoning that would have displaced residents. Like I mentioned, he championed police oversight from the beginning when nobody else wanted to. He is supporting the creation of a homeless navigation center, which is something that's still in the pipeline, but something that he has also championed. And he's not afraid of standing up, even when sometimes he's the only person in the room doing so. And that's one thing that I really admire him as one of his constituents. For an example, he ran on campaign finance reform, and he was the only council member at the time to vote for local contribution limits to campaigns. And he's done that multiple times, where sometimes he's the only no vote in the room or the only yes vote in the room because he has values. And he stands up for those values. In short, his platform prioritizes three things: tenants' rights and affordable housing and homelessness, supporting our unhoused populations, healthcare and human infrastructure, universal systems that uplift everybody, such as universal single-payer healthcare, and reimagining public safety. He has a lot of other great policy ideas, but he's a candidate that brings not only progressive values, but experience to the table. And I'm really excited to be here to answer whatever questions you have about Victor. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Selena. And next, as I mentioned earlier, Mia Fonta is on some school board business right now, but Bernice Jones is here. We'll do a brief introduction, and then I will play a video. So, Denise. I don't see her. Okay, I'll just go straight to the video then. Wow. I don't see Lenny's attendees anymore.
Hi, my name is Malia Vella, and I'm running to represent the 18th district in the California State Assembly. Go Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. I'm running for assembly because I want to make sure that our East Bay children and working families who have been left behind by this pandemic have an advocate in the State House that is willing to open those Capitol doors and make sure that the changes that we need can come from the inside. The pandemics of COVID and this moment of reckoning with systemic racism has changed who we are as a community, and we cannot continue to unsee. It has exposed the extreme of racial, social, environmental, and economic injustices that our communities have for far too long had to contend with. I'm a mother of 3, and since our family moved to the East Bay over 20 years ago, while I've laid my head at night in Alameda, every day my hands and my heart have worked for our Oakland community. For the past 20 years, I've had the privilege of working in the nonprofit sector, including starting a business right here in West Oakland. And I now have the privilege of running Oakland Promise, which has made a 30-year commitment to every child and family to ensure that they have a post-secondary education so that they can realize a job, a vocation, or a contribution to our community that is meaningful, that will help to lift Oakland. I've seen firsthand what the impact of living downstream of statewide policies means for people locked out of systems that need to change. These issues of housing, education, reimagining our public safety system, we all wrestle with them, and they're very personal to me. When you grow up and live with the sting of poverty, experience the chaos that comes with moving 13 times in 16 years, have to travel an hour and a half on the 6th line to get a decent education in New York City, or when you spend your childhood looking up to a single mom who worked every day of her life but still had to make choices between a rent payment and a health insurance payment or food in the refrigerator. The personal becomes political then. And I am humbled by the early responses to this campaign. I've received the endorsements of Secretary of State Dr. Shirley Weber, State Treasurer Fiona Ma, former Assembly Member Sandra Swanson, local leaders, the California Legislative Black Caucus, and WAPA PAC, because they know as a Black Latina in Assembly, they can count on me to make our collective experience and history a part of our political future. I want to thank you for creating this space, for this introduction to you all, and I know it's on Zoom and I'm recorded, but I look forward to earning every single vote in the months to come. And I want to thank you for taking the time to lift up this important campaign in the special election. I'm Malia Vella. I'm running for State Assembly. Thank you.
All right, and Lanice is also here now from Mia's campaign, so I'll let Lanice say a few things as well.
Good evening. My name is Lanice Jones, and I serve as the executive director for BWAPA, which is Black Women Organized for Political Action. And unfortunately, Malia Vella was not able to join us this evening, but as you saw, she had her video. Unfortunately, I wanted to be able to introduce the video, but my dear internet service went out. So glad to be back. I just wanted to just share a quote from BWAPA, our BWAPA PAC, and that we are proud to endorse Malia Vella's campaign and her candidacy to serve as a representative in the California's 18th Assembly District. And we see that it's extremely important to our statewide organization to have a Black woman, in particular, at this seat and time, which has been void for many years in this region since our member and now Congresswoman Barbara Lee. We feel that Mia is intimately qualified and ready to serve. And that is a quote from our state president, Desi Woods Jones. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenise. Will you also be taking questions on behalf of the campaign or just doing an introduction today?
No, I believe that when you guys have your next session, Mia will be able to be here for the question and answers.
All right, thank you. All right, so next I have a video from the fifth candidate, James Aguilar. So I will share that in a moment.
Hey, MGO Democratic Club. My name is James Aguilar, and I'm proudly running for the California State Assembly in District 18. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you tonight, Tuesday night, as this week is actually quite monumental for San Leandro Unified School District. We're opening in-person instruction for the first time since the pandemic started. And what does that mean? That means the school board is going back to. So I am up on the dais doing the people's work and ensuring that we are making decisions on behalf of our students, our teachers, and our families. Those are the people that I'm fighting for in this race for the state assembly as well. I look at things like us being the fifth largest economy in the world, yet we are 41st in the nation for people spending, and we can spend $70,000 per prisoner. To me, it just doesn't add up. So we need to fully fund public education in the state of California. That includes higher education. We need to fully fund basic needs initiatives at all 23 CSUs and ensure that our universities are set up for success. Our students have shared so many debilitating experiences, which include housing. Housing, another thing that I'm fighting for. Just 2 years ago, homelessness in Oakland increased 47%, which is ridiculous. We should have never gotten to that point yet. Here we are. And so I'm looking to repeal the Ellis Act and ensure that we put a piece of legislation in place that actually works for the people. Why should we have legislation in the California State Legislature in the state of California that is not working for its people? And with the Ellis Act in particular, is despairing our communities of color and pushing them out of the state of California. It's completely unacceptable. We also need to work towards social housing, public transit-oriented housing, and much more. Transit in this conversation is super important too. I consider myself a bit of a transit nerd. I love talking about BART and AC transit because it gets us everywhere. It gets us to home, it gets us to school, and it gets us to work. I had to commute about an hour and a half every day to San Francisco State University back when we were in person. That's the same experience for a lot of students commuting between many different schools, including Cal State East Bay and UC Berkeley. So we need to incentivize public transit to ensure that we build an affordable, if not free, transit system. And we need to ensure that BART is funded adequately so that we can get more stations up and going all throughout the Bay Area. It's super important. And transit in that conversation is important in connecting education and housing. So it's all overarching, y'all. There is a lot of connections. Throughout all of this too is the climate crisis. We really need to focus on ensuring that in all of these conversations on education, housing, and transportation, we also focus on climate, because the climate crisis is going to come up quite fast, and it's going to affect my generation and the generations ahead of me. So we need to lead the next generation in the fight for climate justice and environmental justice, because it matters. It's going to touch every single aspect of our lives. So again, I'm sorry that I could not be there with you today, but I am offering this. Please give me a call, give me a text at 510-500-6973, or email me at info@jamesforcalifornia.com. I'm always here for you. I'm always down for a conversation, so please reach out. And I hope to see you at the next meeting that you have where you invite candidates over. I would love to have a dialogue and talk about my campaign, what we stand for, and the movement before us, because this is our movement. I hope that you will join me in this journey, and I look forward to having this conversation. Thank you.
All right. So those were the introductions from our different candidates. And so next, we will be going to questions. So if you have a question, you can either type it into the chat, or you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, and we will call on you. So I know it's the busy district, a lot of people have a lot of things they want to ask. So, all right, Howard, you have the first question.
Okay. Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. My name is Howard Agerman, member of the club and Oakland East Bay Democratic Club. And I was really happy to hear Malia mention the community underserved in Oakland. And my concern is what I asked Mr. Bonta last week at the Central Committee. And that is, I'd like the candidates to explain how they would assist the zip codes in Oakland. 3 of the 10 are in East Oakland that are high in COVID infections, 94601, 94603, and 94621 in terms of their work within the assembly, because most candidates are not from Oakland.
All right, so for this question, we will first hear from Malia, and then from Victor's campaign, and then from Denani. And then the next question will go in the reverse sequence. So each person will have 2 minutes. So Malia, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Howard. The vaccine rollout, there have been a lot of issues with it. And I think part of it is all of the barriers that we've identified. The first thing that struck me at the mass vaccination rollout site at the Coliseum was the presence of our National Guard. That's a barrier to access. When we know people don't require insurance, but we ask them for their proof of insurance, that's a barrier to access. When we ask them for identification, even though we know that they don't need to provide a driver's license, but we're asking for that, that's a barrier to access. So how do we address this? We do this in the way that Alameda County, and I think we have to look at how what we've done recently, which is moving towards the community-based sites, working with our community-based health clinics that already have the relationships in those communities, our churches, our community center. Howard, you mentioned the location at Eastmont Mall. Those are all critical to reaching our underserved communities that are not getting the access to the vaccine, making sure that we flyer the neighborhood. Through the state legislature, what we can do is we can make sure that we're prioritizing the rollout of resources to allow for these community-based rollout models. We can require and give resources to allow for people to do mailers, to walk, to make sure that our community health clinics are getting ample quantities of the vaccinations, making sure that we're dispatching Cal OES and giving the resource allocations directly to those communities. I think that that's absolutely critical. The other thing that we need to do is make sure that we are removing things from the sign up, like asking for. There needs to be legislation that just says simply we don't need to ask for proof of insurance. We don't need to ask for identification, and make it very clear in the sign up. The pre-registration online, we know that helps our more well-off communities. It doesn't address the digital divide, which is why the word of mouth model, community-based model works. We also need to go to the schools and work with the schools in those neighborhoods to get the word out about vaccine pop-ups and allow for more walk-ups as opposed to, like I said, the pre-registration.
All right, thank you. And next we will go to Victor's campaign. So you have 2 minutes.
Okay, so it's really hard to follow the answer because a lot of what you mentioned, Malia, from community-based rollout to bridging the digital divide is something that Victor also supports as well. I will say, as a teacher, I was able to get the vaccine. I I made an appointment, I rolled up, I received the vaccine, and it was free. And that's how all medical services should be. And that's what Victor believes in. Victor believes in removing a single payer universal healthcare system that everybody can access. So that's just one thing that I want to add to that. I don't have a longer answer about that. I do think that there needs to be attention. I do think that Victor believes in reaching out to the community and letting communities define for themselves how they need to be served, right? And to listen to people who are doing the work on the ground and how best to serve them. So I think that's all I can speak to at this moment.
All right, thank you. And next, Donati, you have 2 minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Howard, for your question. As someone that has spent a significant portion of my 28 years in Oakland, adjacent to some of the zip codes that you mentioned, I understand what's going on. And the root cause of these inequities is racism. 1 month ago, there was a vaccine drive in a West Oakland church, which we know is a majority Black community. 85% of the people who received those vaccines were white, were people who did not live in West Oakland. So this is a problem of access to resources and issues beyond just website sign up. These are systemic issues that have to go to the root of the problem. And some of those problems include, for certain communities, language access. Many of these websites that are encouraging people to sign up for vaccines are not language accessible. California is so proud of the fact that we care about having ballots and voter registrations in other languages, but we certainly do have significant health disparities. Second, climate change. We cannot extract the fact that West Oakland, which has some of the and Deep East Oakland, some of the zip codes you mentioned, which have the highest rates of COVID, also have some of the highest rate of pollution in the Bay Area. As a former community health worker, I don't think about the immediate cause of someone contracting COVID or the immediate cause of someone not getting a vaccine. I think about social determinants of health. And that starts from birth. That starts with understanding what kind of air you grew up with. That starts with understanding what kind of whether or not you experienced violence in your home. That starts with whether you have access to healthy grocery stores or whether you live in a food desert. So the answer is these are some of our most underserved zip codes. And to address the issue of vaccine inequity, we need to think about this issue holistically, starting with racism.
All right, thank you. And next we have a question from Doug, and after that a question from Andrea. So Doug, go ahead and unmute and ask your question. Doug, you need to turn your mic on. Doug, you're on. Oh, you just turned it off again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you all for participating tonight, and specifically the moderator. Question being, I'm with the Oakland East Bay Democratic Club, and I've just been made chair of labor and economic development. Specifically, what would you do to encourage, and this is in light of the disparity study that was presented a couple of months ago regarding 86% of money in Oakland is spent on white contractors and 14% on others. What specifically would you do to address that, not only in Oakland, but in your district, and allow accessibility to minority companies, not only to have a fair opportunity to bid on these contracts, but that it's because they're federal, state, and local contracts, through the political arm of accountability? How would you hold these general contractors who are coming outside of the city and the state to bid on these contracts and excluding Black and brown and women-owned businesses, And second, we have companies right here in Oakland who practice inclusiveness and allow local contractors to participate, especially considering we have a $1.9 trillion infrastructure package coming out. What will you do specifically to encourage inclusion for Black and brown companies and women-owned companies? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Doug, for your question. So for this one, we will first hear from Janani, and then we'll go to Malia, and then we'll hear from Victor's campaign. So Janani, whenever you're ready.
Sure. So for the first part of that question, I believe in order to reach a place of equity, we need to specifically promote Black and brown and women of color owned businesses. We live in a grossly unequal society, so we need to give preferences to businesses that are owned by minority individuals, support them first in order to eventually get to a place of equality. And as for the second part of your question involving the $1.9 billion budget, we need to reinvest in our economy. You go downtown and you see empty window shops, you see boarded up buildings. Not everyone can afford to build a cute little parklet on a street that happens to be named a slow street. Communities are suffering. And I strongly believe that we need to invest in minority-owned businesses with some of that money. I believe we need to invest in mental health services with some of that money. And I believe we need to invest in stronger tenant debt relief protections with that money. Because people that work in small businesses, especially in Oakland, likely live in Oakland. People that own small businesses in Oakland live in Oakland. And without allowing people to stay in the communities that they're from and remain in, we are not going to reach a place of equity. So yes, we do need to absolutely prioritize this $1.9 trillion on investing in communities of color as in terms of mental health and health, housing, and economic stability. And sorry if I can add 15 more seconds. With my proposal to raise the minimum wage to $22, I don't expect small businesses to do this on their own. I believe that they need to be supported to allow their employees to earn a minimum wage. So I think that $1.9 trillion could be spent very well. I had read that it was billion, but if it's trillion, even better.
All right, thank you. And next we'll hear from Malia. 2 minutes.
You know, I think a few things. One is we really do need to repeal Prop 209. You know, I think it was really devastating to see that Prop 16 failed because it would have allowed us to place, you know, to consider race as a factor, to add those, you know, affirmative action really would have allowed governments and governmental institutions, when we look at contracting and things like that, to consider race, sex, ethnicity, specifically in the area of public contracting. So we still need to do, there's a huge lift there. I'm really committed to repealing Prop 209. We need to continue the work in that area. You know, there's other things we can do. Cities really need to focus on insourcing. Oakland is one of those cities that has spent a long time outsourcing work, social services and other things that really should be permanent positions, long-time positions where there's a living wage, there's a pension, there's health care. Those are the types of things that matter, because if you invest in those long-term jobs that provide the social services direct in the community, you are going to be able to allow people to live in the community in which they serve, which is absolutely critical. You know, we also need to see a public lands PSA pass statewide, which would encourage local hire provisions, which would, you know, place a premium on making sure that we had long-term apprenticeship pathways, make sure that whenever public funds and public lands are used, that we're really investing in career pathways as well, and so that it's you know, it's going to be multi-layered. But we really need to repeal Prop 209 so that we can really consider those things. and reallocate funds. And we need to insource the jobs instead of outsourcing because it's had such a terrible impact on our communities.
All right. Thank you. And Selena, are you ready to answer on behalf of Victor?
Sure, I'm going to do my best with that question. Victor does believe that affirmative action is important, and we need to get back to that at the state level. In San Leandro, there has been talk about making sure that RFPs are local and that they prioritize Black, Latinx, and women-owned businesses. And this is something very hard to do without repealing. And excuse me, because I'm not an expert in this, but the law that you were referencing, Malia, it's hard for us to do it without. My understanding is it's hard to do it without repealing it. So that's something he completely supports, as well as reinvesting in our communities. Some of that money should be going towards education, towards housing, not just more housing, because he knows that more housing quantity doesn't necessarily mean affordability, right? There needs to be more diverse housing and there needs to be more affordable housing to support the people who work in the city staying in the city. And there needs to be a living wage, which is certainly much, much more higher than $15 an hour. So that's a little bit of what he stands for, and certainly believes that we should be serving our communities of color, our women-owned businesses, our Black and Latinx-owned businesses first, because they have faced the brunt of this economic pandemic that has coincided with the physical pandemic.
All right. Thank you. And now we have our next question, which comes from Andrea. And this question is, what is your stand on the Howard Terminal and the Oakland Coliseum? How much do you know about this topic? And are you aware how this will impact the unions if ILW is dismantled? So for this question, we will go to Selena first, and then to Janani, and then to Malia. So whenever you're ready, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I have talked briefly with Victor on this issue. I can tell you the last thing Victor is going to do is give a sweetheart deal to billionaire sports owners. That is the last thing that he's going to be doing. He has supported unions throughout his life, and he would continue to support them here. I think most importantly, he wants to make sure that the people of East Oakland are being listened to, that they're setting the narrative on this. It's such a big part of the culture and the economy, and so it's really important that they set the tone on this, and that he's reaching out to groups like this one to help understand this issue further and to shape what that might look like in terms of his involvement on the state level.
All right. Thank you. And next, Janani, whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Hi, Andrea. Thanks for your question. I take a strong stance opposing the construction of an A's stadium at the Howard Terminal. I do believe we should keep the A's rooted in Oakland. As someone who used to go to Oakland A's games as a child via BART all the time, and I believe we instead should reinvest in rebuilding a new Coliseum, a new stadium where the Coliseum currently is. I personally visited Howard Terminal and other parts of the Port of Oakland last week, and I for myself was able to see how absolutely untenable it would be to create not just a massive stadium, but 3,000 condos and a hotel and other aspects of this project when it is right by an industrial area. And when the A's say that they will create jobs, they're creating mostly office jobs for people who don't live in Oakland. When they say they're creating jobs for a community, they're low-paid, seasonal concession stand workers and other individuals. Right now, we have over 85,000 well-paid union jobs at the port. And we need to continue to support this economy and keep these jobs and support our thriving port industry. We are currently the 5th largest port in the entire nation. And I do not know about ILW being dismantled, and I certainly hope they're not, but I feel like there are many community groups who are allied on this, and regardless, we can come together to stop this because of the impacts it will have on West Oakland gentrification. West Oakland has borne the brunt of gentrification for years, and adding this stadium will add injury to impact and damage communities far more than they need to be at this point. And yes, that is my stance on Howard Terminal and the Oakland Coliseum.
Great, thank you. And Malia, you're next.
First of all, I want to note that I am not for the dismantling of any union. I actually think that all workers should be represented and should have the right to representation. I was actually my first union job was with the ILWU. I was a hotel worker in Hawaii, and the protections that I got through that union were substantial. And I don't see this as an either or. I want the A's, which is our only remaining professional sports team, to stay in Oakland unequivocally. I want that to happen. I too grew up going to Oakland A's games. I remember Dollar Day Wednesdays fondly. They were a big part of my life. That said, the jobs provided by the A's are not just office jobs. We have good union jobs selling those concessions, people that get pensions, they get a wage that they can live on, that they can support their family on. So those jobs are absolutely critical to keep. We also know that we're in the midst of a huge housing crisis. So the amount of housing that we can get by replacing polluters like Schnitzer Steel, just the trade-off there is actually a really positive one. The process needs to be led by the community. There absolutely needs to be community input. But I would like to see the Howard Terminal project come to fruition. I think we're going to get housing that we need, housing at all income levels. We're going to hopefully get the gondola access to downtown Oakland and actually connect, instead of having that horrible divide provided by 980, which really bifurcates Oakland. And we can get rid of a big polluter. And I think all of those things are really important. We also need to help provide and continue to provide good port jobs. And I think we can do all of those things.
All right, thank you. And our next question, I'm combining two questions about policing here. The first one is, what would you propose to bring California serious police reform? Would you try to overturn the Copley law that prevents oversight boards from accessing records of police accused of misconduct? And the second question related to that is, we have 3 civilian police oversight agencies in the East Bay: Richmond, Berkeley, and Oakland, whose work needs to be transparent. Will you commit to carrying this bill if you are elected to the Assembly? And for list sequence, we will go to Malia first, and then Donati, and then from Victor's campaign. So Malia, whenever you're ready.
The Copley law has provided a lot of issues. We know we need transparency. It's something that's really important. We did a lot when we underfunded, all of our social services in the 1980s, and we told everyone to call 911. But that is not an excuse for the misconduct that we have seen, and that we've seen essentially buried and covered up. I've seen it, I've experienced it as an elected official, where I've gotten one answer and then seen very, very different things on video. And we need to not shelter bad actors. And so we really do need to highlight what's occurring and make it easier for that transparency to occur, because I believe if we have that transparency, we're going to get better results. We're also going to weed out what the problem is, rather than give an ability for agencies and officers to hide bad actors, which hurts all of us. So I think overturning that is absolutely critical. I think the second part of the question, sorry, there's I'm trying to pull it up here.
It's
Alfred,
about
what was the second part of the question?
police oversight agencies. How will you commit to making sure that their work is transparent?
Like I said, we need to make, we need to overturn some of the things that are in existence that allow for things to stay hidden. So we need to change access processes. We also need to give more teeth to the oversight boards that exist. So they should have the ability to review personnel records. There should be a process for reviewing. It's very difficult. I'm in a position where I've asked for documentation, and we have a number, as you know, of legislative barriers that give those protections. I think there's one thing to provide due process. It's another thing to allow for the hiding of evidence. We also need to basically allow for the conflict of interest waivers to have these cases go straight to the AG's office rather than the local district attorney. It cannot be a self-policed model the way that it's existed.
All right, thank you. And next we will have Janani. 2 minutes.
Yes. Oakland has been at the forefront of police accountability and police reform, and these efforts are consistently backstopped by Sacramento. And I believe it's time to have a voice that represents what the majority of Oakland believes needs to happen, which is to refund services that communities want and bring accountability to officers that cause harm. I personally am in support of ending qualified immunity for good. I support the SB2 bill that's come out a couple of weeks ago because individuals whose families of victims who have been killed by police brutality or impacted by police brutality need the recourses all of the recourses that they might get to reach a form of justice. It is tragic that last year, a bill that would have decertified police officers accused of misconduct didn't even reach the assembly floor. And I'm hoping things can be better this year. And I'm certainly hoping if and when elected, I can continue to push SB2 and similar bills forward. I 100% agree with the need to overturn Copley and the Police Bill of Rights. As far as access to records goes, I believe Nancy Skinner's bill last year that expanded public access to police misconduct records is a good start, but certainly not enough. And I know this because when I served on the City of Oakland Public Ethics Commission, we saw all the time people asking for police records. We knew that the Skinner bill was passed. We knew that Oakland had other protections that allowed individuals to get the police records involving misconduct that they deserved, and the public has a right to see. And yet we are still experiencing lawsuits where, despite having commissions that are like the Oakland Ethics Commission that are trying to mediate, despite having activists who care about the issues, police are not turning over these records. So we need to do something about it now.
Right, thank you. And next, Selena on behalf of Victor's campaign.
Thank you. This is actually a question that I'm qualified to answer. I'm doing my best, but I met Victor through work on police oversight. As we speak, he is fighting for the strongest possible model of police oversight in San Leandro. In January, the council committed to creating police oversight within 6 months, and he has really been the driving force behind that decision. He's partnered with the community at every step of the way. Like I mentioned, he was at protests. He was speaking to the families of victims. He was hearing policy proposals. He was committed to making it happen, and he was able to make it happen. So ultimately, it comes down to transparency, accountability, and equity. Ending qualified immunity, Nancy Skinner's bill that increases transparency, I can't remember the number right now, but decertifying officers who are found guilty of misconduct, partnering with local community organizations, as he's done in San Leandro and would continue to do. There are a lot of great grassroots organizations in Oakland that he would be turning to for advice in this area. He's all in on police accountability and also investing in community forms of safety. He knows that more police does not mean more safety. And in fact, for many people, it means less safety. So he's invested in pursuing other models of community safety, and helping to increase accountability at the state level. I have 30 seconds left. Wow, okay, I'm done.
All right, thank you. And now we have a question from Tanya Love, and then we'll have a question from our member Jim. So first, Tanya's question is, do you believe that all state workers should have the right to union representation, including legislative staff? Would you vote to support the Lorena Gonzalez bill, Assembly Bill 314? And for this one, we will go to Janani first, and then to Selena on behalf of Victor, and then to Malia. So,
Yes, this one's easy. Of course, I support all state workers, including legislative staff, to have the right to representation. And I think it's tragic that the bill that Lorena Gonzalez tried to introduce for multiple years hasn't passed at this point. And it's extremely important. Legislative staff deserve representation, as do everyone. The power of unions determine whether or not you might be able to earn a living wage, determine whether or not you have a right to fight against allegations of sexual assault and office place misconduct. I am the product of labor unions. My grandparents came to this country without $1, a degree, but just a dream. And the only way they were able to reach economic stability was through joining a labor union under AFL-CIO. And I think every person in this country deserves to have those same opportunities that my family did, thanks to unions. That's all.
Short question. So next we will hear from Victor's campaign.
Without a doubt, absolutely. Victor stands with unions. This is no brainer, as Janani was saying. Yeah, that's all I have to say with it. Absolutely. I know that this is his position, is to support worker protections for everyone. Everyone should have a union. I'm a teacher at a private school. I wish I had a union. I'm gotta organize one. So anyway, pass it on.
Thank you. And next, Malia.
Yeah, I absolutely support the legislation. Having been legislative staff, for both then Senate Majority Leader Alan Corbett and the District Director for Assemblymember Bill Quirk. I know more than anyone, or the same as all the legislative staff, just how much time and energy they put into the job. Many of them are working 80 to 100-hour weeks with limited protections. I mean, certainly it's very hard. I think the Me Too, all of the Me Too stuff that came out in the movement has really shown that some of these workplaces can be very toxic and very hard for staffers to raise issues like workplace safety, discrimination, harassment, and they need the protection of a union. I'm somebody who's worked as a union organizer. I also work in organized labor. I'm proud to have the sole endorsement of Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez. I'm absolutely in support of this legislation, and I think that this is how we're going to be able to ensure that we close the gender pay gap that exists. We make sure that there are protections, including for legislative staffers, to raise issues like discrimination and harassment in the workplace without fear of retaliation. So yes, 100% support.
All right. Thank you. And our next question is from Jim. Public education in Oakland still has scars from the state takeover and the 2004 imposing conversion of several public schools into charter schools. During the conversion, 15,000 students became charter school students, an 800% increase. Will you work to repeal Education Code 47605-2, which is the tool used by the state to convert existing public schools into charter schools? And for this one, we will hear first from Malia, and then from Victor's campaign, and then from Janani.
Great question. I absolutely support the repeal. It has more importantly, I think we need to do work to prevent more school closures. OUSD is faced with a number of school closures. I was following the proposal by the board members. I absolutely support the reparations and the work that they're doing there. It would have been nice if the school board had also supported banning more school closures, which are impacting, it's an equity issue that's impacting some of our harder hit communities and disproportionately impacting our communities of color. That said, this education code provision has basically created this massive loophole to suck funding out of public education and allow for this semi-privatized system that's occurring. But we have to backfill it. We can't just repeal this. We need to prevent the school closures from happening in the first place and make sure that we have our neighborhood schools. That's what our public school system is supposed to do. It's supposed to provide that neighborhood school opportunity. We need to send the resources to the schools. I represent school district employees. I represent folks that do everything from providing the meals to serving as the teaching assistants. And I will tell you, they are so underpaid and underfunded. And so we really need to make sure that as we have this conversation about reallocating resources and reimagining policing, that we are shifting resources into education, including early childhood education, because education is a cumulative thing, and you have to support it from the beginning. My mother was a public school teacher and a speech therapist. She was a CTA member, and it was hard for her when there were school closures because it meant that the teachers and the staff there also had uncertainty, and it's not good for our students or staff to have that burden on them, not knowing year to year whether or not the school that they're at is going to stay open.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Victor's campaign.
Thanks. I know that if Victor were here, he'd point out that not only are we hurting because of the conversion, but we're hurting because of the legacy of redlining in the Bay Area and the way that schools are funded, public schools are funded. Charter schools are a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, essentially. Sometimes they're the only accessible option. When schools are funded by the surrounding neighborhood, the surrounding property values, right, that creates serious systemic inequities. And this kind of half public, half privatized version isn't the solution. But we also need to prevent as many school closures as possible. So one thing that I guess I can leave it there. Victor supports allocating resources to education and making sure that our students are supported, making sure that our students, when they're outside of school, can still have access to free lunches, making sure that charter schools follow the same rules and regulations as their public school counterparts. There was, I think, a recent bill that Victor would support, introduced by Alex Lee, that dealt with where these schools could be built, because often they can be built in ways that are environmentally harmful because they don't follow the same rules as public schools. Alfred, can you remind me of the original question just so I make sure I cover everything to the best of my abilities?
Sure. Will you work to repeal Education Code 47605, which is what is used to convert existing public schools into charter schools?
Yeah, the question is yes, absolutely. He would be voting to repeal that. Yeah.
Thank you. And next, Janani.
Short answer, yes, I would absolutely work to repeal the Education Code 47605, Section 2. But, I mean, thinking about this issue, charter schools in Oakland in particular are massive. They're almost half as big as public schools. We need to curtail charter school growth and increase funding to students at OUSD. There are too many forms of students who cannot be served by charter schools, and we need to reinvest in Oakland public schools, period. I also believe, to address the issue of public education in our district, we need to work to relieve OUSD's massive debt. I believe almost $20 million worth of debt. And I think this is legislation that the state has the capacity to certainly carry, and we certainly should. School closures in the past several years have been not just schools in Oakland, but majority Black schools that have closed in recent years. We went from having, I believe, over 120 schools in the district to 75 or 80 currently as of today. But stepping back for a second, we also need to remember that California was in the 70s the crown jewel of public education in the nation. And after Prop 13, we have slowly sunk to ranking in the 40s, 40 something out of 50 in dollars spent per child. We rank poorly in test scores, and we have high teacher turnover. I think about 20% of Oakland teachers, that's the turnover rate in Oakland public education, and this destabilizes students ultimately. So we need to overturn Prop 13 and support our public education system, not charter schools, period.
All right, thank you. Next, we have a question from Austin. The question is, what will we have to give up to keep the A's? And is that worth it? So for this one, we will first hear from Victor's campaign, then from Malia, and then from Janani.
Oh, it's me. Hi. Honestly, I do not know enough about Victor's position to speak on this, and I don't want to riff. So I will pass it. I will pass it on.
I totally understand. Thank you. Next, Malia.
Thanks. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
The question is from Austin and is, what will we have to give up to keep the A's? And is that worth it?
I don't know. I don't know in terms of what will we have to give up. I mean, I think part of the Howard Terminal plan and really the focus is to force to really create a pathway for infrastructure investment and housing being built at all income levels, and for it to be borne by the developers as opposed and housing providers as opposed to a public investment in this. So I think that that's been one of the pitfalls of the Coliseum project is, we've ended up fighting with the Raiders, fighting with the Warriors to make sure that they're paying back what they owe taxpayers. I think we want to stay away from that model, which is why the Howard Terminal model was proposed. The more that we can maximize the benefits, and I believe housing is a human right, but we also need to make sure that we're building housing, and we don't have enough. So if we can get much needed housing, we can create jobs in the community, and we can work with the community in terms of what the project looks like, and we can get rid of a large scale polluter. I think that those are all benefits. I don't see them as huge costs in terms of keeping Oakland. I also think that it gives us ample opportunity to look at the Coliseum property, to figure out ways we can build housing there, to work with the community there. I don't want the A's to leave the Coliseum without having us really think long term about the opportunities that we could have at that very site.
Thank you. And Janani.
So I will say what we should not compromise on and what we should not give up on. We should not give up on keeping thousands of longtime West Oakland residents housed in return for lining the pockets of billionaires. We've seen already in West Oakland, when the first couple of waves of gentrification happened, the amount of displacement that happened in these communities. There were gentrifiers complaining about noise levels from musicians in West Oakland churches that were forced to leave. Another thing we should not give up, 85,000 plus union jobs, well-paying union jobs at the port. And having visited Howard Terminal, I personally saw the turning basin through which ships absolutely require to easily turn around and move in the direction that they need to head. Without that turning basin and with the ballpark stadium right next to it, those jobs will be threatened because businesses are going to take their shipping elsewhere. Another thing that we should not give up, $200 million at the very minimum, that's Libby Schaaf's quote, of taxpayer money going into a stadium, when in reality, the A's can move wherever they want after. After a few years, Major League Baseball can choose to let them move to any other city, wherever they want in the country. And that is millions of dollars going into that infrastructure from taxpayer dollars. And that's not worth it. I believe in rebuilding the Coliseum, in keeping the possibility of a world-class stadium next to many transit locations in East Oakland, and supporting local businesses right where we have it in East Oakland. No one doubts that we need to rebuild the current Coliseum, which is old and needs quite a few improvements, but we can do that there. The Fishers already own half the land. Let's reinvest that money where it's at, near public transit, and keep the port as an economic hub for working class people.
Thank you. All right, so we're coming up towards the end, but we have a few more questions, so we'll have shorter answers for these. The first one is just a yes or no question. And it is, will you take corporate money, developer money, or police union money? Yes or no? Starting with Janani.
I have pledged to not take any corporate donations, nor any donations from the oil and gas industry, big pharma, police unions, any unions that represent police officers, and their executives of any of the aforementioned organizations. I'm running a 100% corporate-free campaign, and I'm actively returning donations, which I have already.
Thank you. Malia.
I'm not taking any money from police unions. I'm not taking money from big pharma. I'm not taking money from big oil or any fossil fuel companies.
Thank you. And Selena, on behalf of Victor.
Yeah, we're also running a clean money campaign. We are not going to be accepting police union money. We haven't, and we won't be doing that in the future. We aren't going to be accepting money from corporate landlords, from big pharma, big oil. We want to make sure that the money that we accept reflects our people-driven campaign and our values. So none of that here either.
Thank you. And for our next question, let's keep these to 1 minute responses so we can get to our questions. This one is from Marga. It is, what legislation will you introduce to end the school to prison pipeline? And we'll start with Victor's campaign, and then Janani, and then Malia. So take it away.
I think that's a really complicated question. I know Victor would support any legislation that reduced the prison pipeline. I don't know what he has in the works. I know what I would suggest to him, but I would need to get back to you guys on that, and perhaps he can come when he visits you next.
Thank you. Janani?
Repeal Prop 13, invest in public education first. Second, support mental health services and restorative justice programs for all individuals who are youth. Third, decrease the use of our carceral system to begin with. Why are we policing children? Why are we incarcerating children and teenagers? Why is there a pipeline set up to set people up for failure? There are many organizations in our district, particularly in Oakland, organizations that I work with, including MH First, which is an offshoot of APTP, and Men Creating Peace. These are the kinds of organizations we need to invest money in. They provide alternative models to justice that have proven benefits. These kinds of organizations are led by individuals who formerly perpetrated harm, and they were able to turn their life around without going to prison and experiencing the brutal realities of our carceral system that land people in a worse place than better.
All right, and Malia.
We need to make sure that people have the basic necessities to have a good quality of life. We need to build more housing. We need to get rid of our old redlining systems, remove barriers to housing and services. We need to enact tenant protections that are strong, that keep families housed and prevent displacement. We also need to make sure that we are investing in our public education. I was sad to see that the Prop 13 repeal failed. I will support more attempts at making sure that we get rid of split roll. We invest in public education. We invest in early childhood education, universal TK and pre-K. The other thing that we need to do is really recognize family responsibilities. And I think that that's something that COVID has highlighted, and we need to give workers protection and flexibility in taking time off to spend time with their families and care for their children.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from Tanya Love, and the question is, what is your position on Black reparations? And we will start with Malia and then go to Janani and then to Victor's campaign.
I support them. I support the actions taken by our new OUSD trustees, including Mike Hutchinson and Van Cedric Williams. I think that I was sorry to see what they put forward being weakened, because it really was not just about the reparations for the Black students, which were very much needed, but also prohibiting more school closures, which really hurts communities of color in the long run. So it needs to be comprehensive, but I support them. We're looking at things like the UBI in the city of Alameda. I think all of these things really need to be looked at. We need to really focus on making sure that we're helping out the students that really need the help the most. And so that's why I absolutely support it.
Thank you. And Janani.
I absolutely support it, and I agree with the fact that this was weakened, unfortunately, and I hope efforts are made by OUSD in the future to bring it back to the strength that it was in. I was also a vocal supporter and actively advocated for AB 3121 last year in the state assembly, which would launch a statewide study to support reparations for all individuals who were descendants of slavery. Like I mentioned before, we're never going to get to a place of equity without taking active efforts to let everyone have those same chances to succeed. And that starts with reparations. That starts with putting cash in the hands of individuals who can choose to do what they want with it. It is their right, and we need to bring that money back to them.
All right, thank you. And now Selena on behalf of Victor's campaign.
Yes, I know that Victor supports this, and we need to be looking to Black leaders and grassroots organizers to define what that looks like. It could look, whether it's universal basic income, housing, student debt remission, whatever forms it takes, we should be turning to Black organizers who are already doing that work. He would support reparations not just for Black Californians, but also for Native Americans and Japanese Americans, people who California has historically either displaced through genocide in the case of our Native American populations, or interned. All of these groups, California needs to reckon with its legacy towards all of these groups. Another example where he would support reparations, there was recent, I can't remember when, but there's a case of forced sterilization in women's prisons that was introduced as something that needed reparations for. That's something that he would support if he ever got the opportunity to. So short answer, yes. Long rambly answer, what I just gave. Hope that suffices.
Thank you. All right, and Malia. Did you answer this one already yet?
I did, and I support it. I think we all support it.
Great. All right. To our candidates, I know it's 9 o'clock. There are a couple more questions that just came in. Do you have another 10 minutes? Is that good? Good, Malia? Another 10 minutes?
I'm fine with that. That's fine.
Selena? Great. All right. So this one is from Marga. what will you do to end fracking in California? And we will start with Janani and then to Victor and then to Malia. 1 minute.
So I believe we need to save our planet. We need to save California's shorelines. We need clean air for all Californians, particularly the communities most impacted, which are low-income communities of color. We need to ban fracking now and simultaneously bring a just transition for all individuals whose jobs might be impacted by a ban on fracking. It is tragic today that for a third year in a row, the bill that would have banned drilling close to SB 467, a bill that would have protected hundreds of communities from the toxic impacts of oil and gas extraction in California, failed today. And we need to continue to think about environmental justice holistically, which includes a ban on fracking, while also thinking about a just transition for workers that do already work in these polluting industries. We're seeing examples of, is that my timer?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, and now from Victor's campaign.
Ban it, absolutely. The environmental impacts are terrible. We already have earthquakes caused by tectonic plates. We don't need fracking earthquakes as well. We don't need our neighborhoods facing that kind of pollution, especially given the fact that environmental racism is real and that often it's our poorest and most vulnerable populations that are near. Am I unmuted? Yes, I am. That are near sites like this. So a ban completely on that, just transition for the people who have those jobs, and rebuilding our, building our infrastructure, our environmental infrastructure in a new way that's more just, that creates jobs, that serves our environment. I mean, anyone who lives in California and has experienced the fires know that we should not be contributing to this environmental catastrophe. So yeah, ban it. That's the position.
Malia.
Yes, we need to ban fracking immediately, especially it's impacting our shorelines. We know that it's having impacts on our plates. You know, I think part of just transition, and certainly I think it's going to need to be part of a larger jobs package in order to get the votes needed to pass. But I think that part of this is also talking about local economic diversification plans. So we also need to make sure that as we're transitioning away, we're also working, you know, with and giving guidance to and funding for diversification of, you know, in terms of transitioning into other environmentally safe energy sources, and also working with our communities to make sure that they can manage the impacts. And it's a huge issue in terms of equity. I know, sitting on the Alameda County Lead Abatement Board with the Healthy Homes Department, that this issue disproportionately impacts residents who live in older homes. And so, you know, we need to help them with the transition as well, and provide resources to help them with those transitions.
Thank you. And our second to last question, what is your position on redevelopment dollars coming back to cities? And we'll start with Malia.
I was working in the state legislature when redevelopment went away, and it really pulled the rug out from under our local jurisdictions in terms of their ability to fund affordable housing, and we have not found a replacement for it, and it's had a huge negative impact on all of our communities. So you know, we need to bring it back. We need to fund affordable housing. We can't have it where we're all competing for the same small pool of affordable housing dollars. And now is the time to look at bringing redevelopment or some form of it back, especially as it relates to housing and allowing a transition to a more multimodal Vision Zero design scheme.
Thank you. Janani, you're next.
I'll be brief. Yes, I absolutely support bringing back redevelopment dollars to support housing and, if possible, education and other programs that support us.
All right, thank you. And we'll hear next from Victor's campaign.
Yeah, we also support, and I'm going to take this minute to briefly sketch out what his plan is in terms of solving our housing crisis in California. Short term, middle term, and long term. Short term, we need permanent supportive housing and services for unhoused people. Middle term, we need to protect the housing that we do have through tenant protections. And 3, long term, we need to diversify our housing portfolio and fill in the gaps of what's missing. Maybe I did address this earlier. Did I address this earlier? I don't know. I'm going to address it again because it's that important to our communities. We need so much more diverse housing. We're missing large housing like social housing and mixed income. We're missing small housing units. So he plans on really diversifying that portfolio and supporting anything that allows us to reinvest in more affordable housing as well. So this is absolutely something that aligns with his values.
Thank you. And now our last question is about Senate Bill 271. This is a bill that would expand the number of people who are able to run for county sheriff. How will you vote on this bill? You just need a yes or no or abstain position. And we will start from Janani.
I will say yes, and 2 things. I was an early supporter of this bill. I drafted a letter of support and got at least 5+ organizations on board with this bill from the domestic violence community and from anti-community violence organizations. So absolutely.
Thank you. And next from Victor's campaign.
Yeah, we're in the same boat. It's really important to make sure that people in positions of power represent us. The sheriff's is an important position. Go Joanne Walker, yay. So yeah, we would support this as well.
Thank you. And next from Malia.
Yes, I support it, and Alameda City Council supports it. It was I was proud to support it as part of our legislative priorities package.
All right. Thank you. And that concludes our questions, and we will give each candidate 2 minutes for a concluding statement, starting with Malia and then to Victor's campaign and then to Janani. So Malia, whenever you're ready.
I think there are so many important issues that we discussed tonight. My name is Malia Vella. I'm running for Assembly in the 18th Assembly District. We know we need to make sure that we build more housing at all income levels. We know that we need to shift resources to help people and invest in the social services that we know make a difference for everyone and improve quality of life. We know that we need to make sure that we are funding education, early childhood education. We also know that we need to invest in career pathways. These are things that I have worked on. I have a proven track record. I've done this in elected office in the city of Alameda. I've taken the votes with pride to make sure that we have tenant protections, that we're building housing, and that we are protecting good jobs. And I think that I take this experience to the state assembly. I know that I can do it. I'm happy to not just be a vote for progress, but to be a leader in it. I've done that in Alameda when people told me it wasn't possible. We've moved further and further left, which is a good thing, because if we're not able to do this from the East Bay, a safe progressive seat, then California is not going to continue to shift left as we know it needs to. I'm an attorney, a workers' rights attorney, a professor at Mills College, where I teach public policy, and the vice mayor of Alameda. I hope that you'll join my campaign. My name's Malia Vella. I've been endorsed by a number of different people, including State Controller Betty Yee, a number of labor unions, Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez, Peralta Community College trustees, Julina Bonilla, and Kevin Jenkins, and so many others. I hope you'll join our campaign. Thank you so much for hosting this tonight.
Thank you. And next from Victor's campaign.
All right, well, I'm here representing Victor because I truly believe that he has the values and experiences to push our district in California in a more progressive direction. I hope that you've all heard about what he's been doing so far in San Leandro. He's really made a difference in our community with hazard pay, rent stabilization, eviction moratoriums, protecting mobile home parks, working towards police oversight, and restorative solutions, community solutions to issues like mental health and homelessness. He's an amazing advocate, and Malia's absolutely right that we are in a safe blue seat. It's time for bold ideas. It's not time to kind of tiptoe around things, and he's looking to make impactful change in Sacramento and bringing his values to Sacramento. As I've mentioned, he has been bravely standing up for his community. Sometimes when he's the only one voting in a particular direction, he stands by what is right, and I think he'll be a good representative in Sacramento. He's going to be fighting for housing, he's going to be fighting for reimagining public safety, and he's going to be fighting for universal single-payer health care, among all the other issues that we've talked about today. So thank you for bearing with me as I serve as his proxy. He really hopes that when he doesn't have a meeting, he can come here and speak to you all in person, and you can continue asking him hard questions. And I'm going to pop our campaign email into the chat just so that if you have any follow-up questions, you can reach out to us because, you know, I'm here because we wanted to hear from you. He wanted to hear from you. He wanted to make sure that he could partner with the community and with you guys today. So thank you.
Thank you. And Janani.
I believe that California doesn't just need another Democratic body in our legislature. We need a bold, progressive leader who is ready to push the needle, because I am done waiting for change to just happen. I'm ready to fight and enact the bold policies that will bring change our communities deserve. I'm fighting for a $22 living wage. I'm fighting for building not just housing, but affordable housing and stronger statewide tenant protections, including repealing Costa-Hawkins and the Ellis Act. I'm fighting to bring an end to qualified immunity for police officers. I'm fighting for Medicare for all because as a former community health worker, I know the life-saving value of preventative care and coverage, and I've seen it. I'm fighting for a Green New Deal because my generations and the ones after deserve clean air, shorelines, and a right to be able to live and thrive in our communities. For those who haven't met me yet, I am a social justice lawyer, I'm an activist, and I'm an artist. In my past, I've fought to keep tenants in their homes. I've fought to give survivors of violence a shot at justice and safety, and I've worked with individuals experiencing mental health crisis. So I will bring every ounce of my energy, my fresh community-driven perspectives, and my fighter spirit to our state government, because this is a time we need something different and we need change now. This is not something I can build alone. This is a movement that I am trying to build with all of you. So I would love for all of you to follow along my campaign and join me on this journey. I will also pop my email in the chat. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again. And anyone, if you want to unmute and applaud our candidates for coming tonight.
Awesome.
Good job.
Woo! Great job, everyone.
Good job. Thank you. Good job.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming. Candidates, feel free to drop your links.
Thank you, Alfred. Thank you.
Thank you.
For everyone, if you want to come to our future meetings, just follow us on Facebook. We are MGO Democratic Club, or go online to www.mgodems.org. Gary, do you have anything else you would like to add?
The only thing I'll add is that, Alfred, you have done a magnificent job tonight. We all thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alfred. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Over a year of these Zoom meetings has gotten better at them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred.
Thank you.
Sure.